There have been many studies done on what people fear the most in life, and consistently, two things come up, oftentimes even before death itself. The first being public speaking, and the second being talking to strangers. Have you ever experienced this before? In the workplace, or at your favorite coffee shop, you see someone that you want to talk to, a cute girl, the guy you know from the office, but as soon as you come up with the plan, your mind goes completely blank. You start to overthink it and you end up doing nothing. In this video, I will give you 3 strategies from the book, The Fine Art of Small Talk, which will make talking to people much easier, and then we'll finish off with 10 bulletproof questions to start conversations and continue them and reach a level of depth that the weather will never get to. Before reading this book, I hated small talk. The bane of my existence. I felt like I didn't have time for small talk because it always led nowhere. I was the type of person to go to an event, hang on the perimeter, and only talk to people if they by chance happened to start a conversation with me. If not, then I would just go the whole night talking to nobody. The first chapter of this book hammered something home to me. Stop waiting for people with better skills to come and rescue you. The only times I would talk to people is when extroverted people would go out on a limb and talk to me. Being good at talking to people is not an innate skill, it is learned through practice. And waiting for someone else to talk to you is self-centered. You are putting your own comfort over everything else. And it turns out the reason that we avoid talking to people is safety. If we never talk to anyone, we never have the chance of an awkward encounter. Pretty smart, right? The only downside then is our human contact is restricted to whoever is in our social circle and the please and thank yous that we give here or there. Also, sometimes shyness visibly manifests itself the same way as arrogance. He doesn't want to talk to me because he thinks he's better than me, which blew my mind because I have had so many people in my life say to me, "I thought you hated me," when I finally got the nerve to talk to them. Don't be me, talk to people, but how can we fix this? After reading the first 2 chapters of the book, I was in a meeting and I thought I would try out what I was learning. We had just kicked off a new project and I was in a meeting with myself and our new product owner. Now in my role, the product owner is the most important connection I will have. If you're over budget, if you're over timeline, this is the person that you will need to speak to. If you have a certain rapport, the eyes of blame will never fall onto you, and it just makes your life a hell of a lot easier. So I really wanted to make a good impression and build a strong relationship with this person. So when I started this meeting, instead of diving right into the work at hand or talking about the weather or typical things that people talk about, I asked her a question. See, recently I had been researching towels. I desperately needed an upgrade. I didn't realize that the type of towel that you're using can drastically affect how frizzy your hair is, and my hair was turning into a nightmare. But I was stuck on one key point. So I asked her, what's the difference between a bath towel and a bath sheet? Turns out she knew the answer and was more than happy to explain it to me and actually help me with my buying decision. And you could tell as soon as I asked this question, the entire tone shifted. Suddenly she was more upbeat and there was an instant connection created. After the call, I wrote a note to myself. That was the most delightful meeting I've had in a while. Small talk works, if done correctly. How do we do it correctly? Ask questions that we genuinely care about. Instead of asking the usual questions that we feel like we're supposed to ask each other, ask things that you're curious about. Could be things in the room. Something like, does that guy's shirt have octopuses or clowns on it? Or do you happen to know anything about turtles? Random, but we'll start a conversation and is more interesting than talking about the weather or other water cooler topics which we tend to default to. Honestly, I think the more random the better. But that's just for me. Oy. So it is inevitable in a conversation that you will run into a handful of questions, such as, what do you do for work? Where are you from? What do you do for fun? Normally, we give one-word answers and there's not much of a back and forth with these questions. But if we know they're coming, we can craft answers to those questions which can stimulate more interesting conversation. Think deeply about some details and information that you can add that makes your response more interesting, that will make people want to know more and continue the conversation. This is where a little helper can come in, an index card. If your mind tends to go blank during conversations, before you go to a social setting, write out your answers to the questions you know are coming on one side, and then on the other side, write out interesting anecdotes, hobbies, things you want to talk about. Now this makes conversation much easier as you already know a jumping off point, because it's always the hardest to get the ball rolling in conversation. Once it's rolling, it's much easier. And if you ever feel yourself in a pinch, you can just run off to the bathroom or a private place where you can look at your index card and collect your thoughts before you carry on further. This probably isn't necessary if you are well practiced in talking to people, but if you're just starting and you get very anxious, this is extremely helpful. A good question to ask yourself is, what makes you interesting? Think of it as your elevator pitch. And if you are convinced that you're not interesting, then just be interested. Pay close attention to what people say and ask good follow-up questions. Usually they will leave you breadcrumbs for what to ask in what they say, and it's pretty obvious if you're paying attention. You can have absolutely nothing going on in your life, but as long as you're listening and asking good questions, people will think that you're an interesting person. That's the cheat code. A couple rapid fire tips from this book that I really liked. First one being, whenever you go to an event, turn talking to people into a task. Once done, you can leave. For instance, go to an event once a week and talk to one person. Doesn't matter the length or the depth of the conversation, just go up and start a conversation with one person. Every time I go to ping pong now, I have made it a requirement that I need to talk to one person. And in the beginning, this was borderline impossible for me, and many weeks went by where I just couldn't get myself to do it. But once you get in the process of doing it over and over and over, it starts to become easy, and you'll realize that you're fearing nothing. Second one, turn off your phone. There's nothing more disrespectful that you can do during a conversation than pulling out your phone. It shows that you're not listening and that you do not care what the other person is saying. Turn it off, leave it at the door, whatever you have to do. Next, as soon as you see someone that you want to talk to, smile and make a plan to talk to them. You can implement something called the 3-second rule, whereby as soon as you have the thought, I want to talk to that person, count down from 3. As soon as you get to 1, take a step and start acting, before your mind can start overthinking and tricking yourself into not taking action. But Wilson, I don't know what to say. Let's dig into the most important part, your questions. Write them on an index card, keep them in your pocket, memorize them, steal them, use them. Let's talk about 10 great conversation starters that also garner a level of depth and interest in conversations. For starters, you want to be asking open-ended questions. Things that start with, how did you? Tell me about. Describe for me. As opposed to asking questions that always lead to one-word answers like, are you married? Do you have kids? What do you do for work? We tend to default to these questions, but they never lead to productive conversation. So ask open-ended questions that allow people to expand and tell you more, which then you can ask follow-up questions on. My absolute favorite one, shout out to my sister, Schmoozing Master. She asks, what's on top? Which almost always leads to the response, what do you mean? Which then you say, with a hand flourish, top of mind. Then you're off to the races with whatever they're thinking about. Things ranging from national debt to inflatable pool toys. This is great because it gets them immediately talking and breaks the cycle of stale conversations about meaningless topics. Thank you, Veronica. Genuinely use this in every one of my conversations now. Compliment, a genuine one. What can you tell someone thinks a lot about that you appreciate? Is it their sense of style, their posture, their hair? Tell them about it. Wow, that's a great shirt. Where'd you get it? Recently, I'm on a mission to make my hair more healthy. So every chance that I get when I see someone that has healthy hair, I will call them out, and people love talking about their hair routines. And I love hearing about it because I get little tidbits that will help me in my hair journey. Never underestimate the power of a good, genuine compliment. This is one I've been using more recently, and it's just being honest. I never know what to say, but I'd like to meet you. Which can then be followed up by the most underrated way to start a conversation out there, introducing yourself with your name. Hi, I'm Wilson. Next one, if you see someone that could be a role model or a father figure, a mentor, ask them You're obviously successful. What was your big break? Or what's your favorite failure? Next, if you're having a problem that you're trying to solve, ask people for help. People love to help. Hey, do you happen to know anything about X, Y, or Z? Or do you know anyone that could help me with X, Y, or Z? Another one that I've been liking recently is, what's the most incredible coincidence you've experienced in your life? It almost always leads to a really interesting story. Now, I'm a car guy, so lean into whatever your hobby or interest is, but I like to ask people, tell me about your first car, particularly as my first car was an absolute dumpster fire, so that always creates some kind of interesting conversation. Another one that I like that I've been using recently is, tell me about a book or a movie that you've seen more than once. This one's kind of a classic twist on what would you do if money was no object, but asking, if your work gave you a 1-year sabbatical, what would you do with that time? And finally, I'll give you one more extra one, which I've been using with varied success, which is, what is a common misconception people have about you? This one can sometimes lead to the answer, I don't know, which is fine, but most of the time it leads to something interesting where you're getting a level of depth pretty quickly. Hopefully you can use some of these questions to fight off your fear of strangers. Who knows who you will meet? If you enjoyed this video, give me a like. I'm on a mission to help people build a habit and love for reading. So if that sounds interesting, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Beep.